Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Adam Hart. Adam is a personal transformation coach who is a leading expert in nervous system regulation. He is the author of The Power of Food, which highlights his personal journey with turning his sugar addiction into a powerful source of love. Adam's passion for sharing his discoveries has led to more than 400 speaking engagements and the creation of a successful coaching program. Welcome, Adam. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tanya. I really appreciate it.
So you and I, we're going to talk about finding calm and clarity during times of chaos. And so many people around the world are experiencing high amounts of stress, racing thoughts, and are finding themselves stuck in that fight or flight response. And so there is a tendency to want to either numb out or detach as a coping mechanism to deal with anxiety, depression, or even diagnoses such as ADHD, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so Adam, in your 20s, you were led down a path of anxiety and later diagnosed with ADHD. And we are seeing these labels put on our children at alarming rates right now at very young ages. And so I wanted to dive into this a little bit and have you kind of explain what ADHD is and how this label was put on you and how did that impact your life?
Yeah. Yeah, and all in a big way, for sure. And I think that, I have a background in sociology, and my coming out of university, I was in a rough place myself. And years later, as I discovered what we're going to talk about today, I did start to look at human adaptation, or essentially our lack of the ability to adapt to our current environment. And there's a level of what we're experiencing day to day that has many of us feeling very triggered, very reactive, very anxious, very fearful, very uncertain. And so I didn't know it at the time and when I was going through this, but so much of it was my lack of understanding the relationship between my own brain and my nervous system. And so when I was young and was diagnosed ADHD and was very impulsive. So what is ADHD? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD. As far as without the hyperactivity, I had the hyperactivity, I had the impulsiveness, I had my mom would say, the just bouncing off the walls and never really having the ability to be calm and present in my own body. Now, I know for what I went through as a child, a lot of that was just wanting to escape the feelings, the emotions of being hurt, or really just not feeling deeply loved. And a lot of it came from my father and my fatherhood experience with my dad when I was a child.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you that, were you even taught how to relax or be calm, or were you, raised in an environment where it just was constant stress and constant anxiety? Because that was my experience as a child.
Yeah. And I think it's such a common one now where our parents don't know how to regulate their own response to stress. So how can they create an environment which would be called co-regulation? So if we can regulate ourselves, we can co-regulate those around us. Well, it's not the way we're taught in terms of how to manage our own daily stress. And as parents, we know how it can be. I have 2 young kids, and it can start to overwhelm you. Just your need to try and take a moment to just have a bit of peace and calm. When I was diagnosed, I was put on Ritalin, and that kind of changed who I was. And for me, it wasn't really a positive experience at all, although maybe I was more calm and could be more attentive in school. It was a fraction of who I really was. And so I started to rebel against that. As I got older, my anxiety for where I was in life and my depression around how things had started to unfold just got worse and worse. I became very heavily addicted to sugar. It was kind of my main go-to: sugar and horror movies.
Really interesting.
Yeah, horror movies became an
Massive
addiction.
anxiety right there.
Well, and not knowing it at the time, but so much of it was just my brain looking for the massive hits of dopamine, wanting that massive energy source. And so that's one that I turned to. And I eventually became pre-diabetic and was overweight and suffering with food allergies and obviously the ADHD, and put on all sorts of different medications. And when I was 24, 25 is when I had my burnout moment and recognized, okay, I'm in rough shape. Like, this is
Which
not
seems
going.
so young.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I had that burnout moment in my late 30s, but mid 20s, that seems really young to have a burnout moment.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a large part of where we are now, where we see kids younger and younger having that level of burnout. And there's mechanisms for where that comes from, which we could chat about. But for me, it just definitely got to that point where I couldn't find a solution. I kept doing what I was told I'm supposed to do. Every time I went to my doctor, he's like, well, you better start getting on a diet of some kind, or else, you're going to be insulin dependent in 6 months if you don't change the direction you're on. That's, because I was pre-diabetic. And then I would try different fitness programs, and, I tried yoga. I tried all these different ways that I was told is the way to get healthier. And all of it just left me feeling more frustrated, more guilty, more self-sabotaging thoughts. But then I got
Which is an
lucky.
endless cycle, right? It's because the thoughts are feeding and then your body will start to respond to that. So it's just this cycle.
That's it, right? And your brain starts to learn the patterns of your own stress. And the brain, it's a beautiful organ, but it is a survival organ. So it is going to try to get you stuck in certain pattern ways of thinking, because it wants you to react to those thoughts so that it is guaranteed the result of you giving it what it wants.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And predominantly that comes from your stress response. It wants the adrenaline. The fight or flight stress response, the main hormone that's produced outside of cortisol is adrenaline. Yeah. And that's what your brain is looking for. And so I didn't know my brain was patterning, 70,000 thoughts is what we have on average every day.
Which is significant.
Mm-hmm. Huge. And so much of my self-defeating thoughts were just a product of my own brain wanting me to get stuck in these patterned reactive ways of being about my life that kept denying me what else was possible.
Yeah. And that's that sympathetic nervous system, that fight, flight, or freeze response. And I think many of us are programmed into that at a very young age. And, I've worked with people who they told me when they were really young, like their mom would, anytime, here in the States, they have on television, sometimes they'll have a buzzer go off, like a noise. And it's an emergency alert system. And her mom would immediately say, it's the apocalypse. It's time to hide. She was trained at a very young age to be literally terrified from this noise that she would hear. And so, watching that pattern play out, I mean, she's in her 40s now, and watching that pattern play out her whole life, she has been in fight, flight, or freeze for most of her life. And so it's unfortunate to see some of these children carrying these children, us included, right? Because we were children at once, right? Us carrying these patterns throughout our daily lives, all the way into adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think most of us are having these experiences because our parents, didn't have it so easy. They did have a lot of things to be in fight or flight around, whether it was, and thinking in terms of my grandparents, different wars that they would have gone through, which is real.
Yes.
But then their inability to understand how to regulate their own response to those stressors, that energy carries into the next generation and how they parent. And then obviously we know the baby boomer generation, that's my parents' generation, they carried that frequency with them. Mm-hmm. So how am I as a child supposed to feel safe in that energy, supposed to feel nourished and feel loved when the dominant energy is one of anxiousness and fear and, needing to feel safe all the time? And it's a tricky place for us to grow. And then for us as parents to hold that for our kids. Now we're in a generation where, whatever we label that next age group is, they're in it really deep now because of the advent of social media. Mm-hmm. and the triggers that creates. And so
COVID too. I mean, just those
yeah,
kids growing through that, through the pandemic, it's so much fear and
yeah,
stress and,
yeah.
just that anxiety. And even, when you're in your mom's womb, whatever your parents are experiencing in that time, even
Mm,
before you're physically birthed, it's like you're still beginning to tune in. You're harmonizing with your mother's nervous system,
totally.
it's small, even conception.
Totally. Yeah. Right. And then so it's just, it's like, well, this isn't something we're taught, is what's actually happening. We're not from a young age really being given access to an understanding of how we can manage our own response to the things that are happening in our lives. And, when my parents yell at me and I feel so defeated, how do I work with that so that I don't let my brain start to control that and start to build these self-sabotaging thoughts about myself, because the brain just knows that if it does that, it's going to get the adrenaline from the thought.
Mhm.
We're not taught that. I just, like I mentioned, I just got very lucky because I found a sport that taught me how to regulate.
Yeah,
And
let's talk a little bit about that, how you were guided into your outlet that helped you regulate.
yeah. And I feel really grateful that I found rock climbing, for obvious reasons as we get into, but just the ability to get something that provided some peace of mind. We have this whole discussion in modern culture around mindfulness. And I think mindfulness is a dangerous word. I don't want a mind that's full. I want a mind that's restful.
Mindlessness.
It's just full of rest, just
Mhm.
full of peace. I don't want it to be full. It's always full, full, full. And we know how that is. We're all running around just ragged with our heads just spinning all the time, trying to figure it out, get here, get there. Climbing was a real fight or flight experience that I was learning how to regulate. An environment where, the first time I ever tried it, I went inside, and this was out of desperation, not wanting another gym membership, being 200 plus pounds and, feeling so crappy about myself, and then stumbling into this indoor rock climbing gym and realizing, wow, there's something about indoor climbing that's making me feel peaceful and feel calm and feeling safe to explore the boundaries of my own fear. And then I became addicted to it. It is the only thing that was giving me a sense of feeling calm in my own mind and a feeling of connectivity to the present moment.
That's so funny. I was on a hike yesterday and we were in in an area with a lot of rocks, and my friend made a comment, it would be fun to rock climb. And I said, that actually gives me anxiety, the thought of rock climbing.
Yeah.
So it's funny how we find our own niche. We find our own path, right? That provides us with that peace, because there could be a lot of people listening right now. Half may say, wow, rock climbing provides me peace, while others say, oh no, that creates anxiety with me. And so it's very important for us to find our own way and to find our own
Mm-hmm.
path to regulate our nervous system. And I want to talk about that, Adam. What does that mean, to regulate the nervous
Mm-hmm.
system? Because we hear that often, but not everyone really even understands it. And myself included, when I worked in a very high paced, high stress trauma environment for nearly
Mm-hmm.
20 years. And lots of bells and alarms and whistles and grief and trauma and
Mm-hmm.
loss and every day. And then when I disconnected from that, my body was still in fight, flight, or freeze. And I had to go through a period of regulating my nervous system. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that. What does that mean when we say regulating the nervous system?
Yeah. And I'll do it, and I'll share in terms of the climbing experience. It's important to know that you don't have to climb to start to do this, but climbing taught me what it actually means to regulate. And here I am climbing, and I'm climbing for hours and hours and hours and hours, for days and days and days and days. So this
Wow.
is a constant relationship with my own fight or flight stress response. So being able to regulate it, being able to actually be present in what is happening in my own thought process and what is happening in my body, and how can I take the relationship of the moment of life and not give in to being reactive to the thoughts, but actually create a moment of peace, a moment of calm, so I can get back my full power of my own biology, brain and body. Now, we know as far as the nervous system goes, it's an autonomic system. It happens automatically, like digestion, like your heart beating, like your blood flow. It's automatically happening. And there's only two states, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So what I didn't realize growing up was that I was sympathetic dominant, like many of us are today.
Many of us were. Mm-hmm.
Right. And we don't even know the difference because we have never really had a life experience with our parasympathetic nervous system. We've had moments, right? And these moments, and a lot of the work that I do and the clients that I work with, the moments show up as these moments of actually feeling peaceful, of feeling flow, of feeling super excited about something.
Usually
whether it's the birth
is when I would experience
right. I was going to say the birth of your child is
mm-hmm.
a common one. But it's the feeling that brings. It's like, okay, well, if I've had moments of those feelings, why do I not have the ability to tap into those more often? And it's only because you're dominant in a fight or flight sympathetic stress response. We're meant to be in the parasympathetic most of our lives. And you think in terms of our ancestors and how they lived in community, they lived in nature. They were very, very few moments were fight or flight, except for when they had to secure food pretty much. Well, that's not something we have to deal with a whole lot anymore. We have food, pretty much processed food anywhere we want. But the elements of the biology of the fight or flight is just so heavily induced into our modern way of living that we don't even know that we can cultivate a relationship with our parasympathetic. And so when we understand that we can regulate our own nervous system, and this is done in the moments of life, it's not, okay, well, let's start meditating every morning for 20 minutes. And that's the moment I get to feel that peace and calm. Well, that's nice. But the relationship that's happening between your brain and your nervous system is 24/7.
Absolutely.
So if you can learn how to regulate that relationship throughout your day, all day long, you start to understand how you can tune into your own natural state of flow in a holistic way where you're not constantly chasing another diet, another fitness program, another meditation practice, another yoga session to reach what you're doing those for. Those results that you're doing those for, that's still a future focused anxiety. How do you cultivate a relationship with having that be your reality now? And that's through your nervous system regulation.
Yeah, and in developing that relationship, I know, for me, when I left that highly acute traumatic job that I was in, it took me some time to bridge the relationship and kind of train my body and my mind that I'm not in fight, flight, or freeze anymore, that I am safe, that I am okay to rest and digest, which is that parasympathetic nervous system. But in that bridge gap that I had between the time I started to work on shutting down the sympathetic, or at least bringing it down to, a minimum, my body locked up on me. For 4 months, I was in what I call, a lockdown stage. My whole body went into tension and stress. It was almost like sympathetic nervous system became a norm for me. Yeah. And then as I began to shift more into parasympathetic, my body wasn't ready for that. And it took me some time, and I went through long bouts of fatigue, and I tried to move as much as I could, just stretching and whatnot, but I was in so much pain and stress that it took me, like I said, 4 months, I could barely walk. I had to crawl to the bathroom. It was the worst experience. But it showed me, when I turned 40, all that happened. For 40 years, I'd been in sympathetic. And now I'm, shifting my program. And so, have you experienced this, or have you had anyone else that you worked with experience this? How do we bridge that gap when we finally consciously recognize we've been living in fight, flight, or freeze, and now we want to shift? How do we regulate, during that bridge time?
Well, and that's a great question. And it's recognizing too that in modern society and the way the fight or flight stress response works is it's an extremely cerebral life experience. It's very head heavy. And so as we learn to bring the parasympathetic in, which is your heart, so it's just bringing the heart into the equation so that you have this ability to utilize your vagus nerve, the main channel of communication between what's happening in your body and what's happening in your head. And as you strengthen the vagus nerve, you have the ability to feel more at peace, more calm, more present. And so with all my clients, I take them through the 6-step process. I call it the Unleash Your Energy Roadmap. So the first step is in being able to just pay attention to where you're feeling the most triggered in your life and begin to bring some softness to that area, but actually do it with some proper tools. Now, in those tools, they are going to provide you some immediate access to feeling more peaceful, more calm, because they're training your vagus nerve to be in what's called coherence. So in that, as you practice this multiple times a day, 3 times or more every day. So this is a practice that actually takes less than 2 minutes a day to achieve. But what it's doing is it's giving your nervous system the space that it needs to heal. This is the first phase of this process. And essentially what that phase looks like is you have to honor rest. The hardest thing for human beings to do, because the brain doesn't want you to do that. And so as you go through this process and you start looking at where you're the most triggered, maybe it's your relationship to your kids. Every morning you get up and right away it's just so frustrating and agitating, and they're fighting and they don't want to do what you want them to do, and you're triggering. How do you create presence in that moment so that you can be in a restful energy around your own nervous system? Teach your brain to let go of the use of your kids as a source of a trigger so that you can rest your nervous system so it starts to heal the way it wants to heal you. Phase 1. Now, if you do that and you're disciplined around that, you're going to get to a very beautiful place where you're not going to need to rest anymore because your nervous system is actually healed. Now you start to live more dominant in your parasympathetic. This is where you have access to an elevated state of your own emotions. This is your emotional frequency. Mm-hmm. This is what you're using to manifest. So when you start to give peace to your mind and you allow rest into your body, you feel more grounded, you feel more powerful, you feel more clear-headed, focused, motivated. Now you start to feel in a way where you manifest things into your life that provide more of that feeling, as long as you continue to regulate your brain's desire to get you to be reactive to something. Mm-hmm. That's the whole day, every day idea. You know, now all of a sudden your morning routine, you've done this beautiful practice, you're in a nice, calm, peaceful state. And then you come home at the end of the day and you have this argument with your partner, perhaps. Okay, that's the moment where you're having this argument to notice, okay, I can now reset again if I choose to. In the moment, reset, bring yourself back to that state of peace. And you start to learn that that is your natural place to live. And you start to recognize quicker and quicker when you're feeling triggered in a way where you actually have the coherence built up, the training of the muscle to be able to be in choice. Hey, wait a minute. I don't like the way this is feeling. I don't want to feel this frustrated right now. I'm going to choose to reset in this moment and come back to that state of being peaceful, calm, present.
Oh, that's powerful. And as you do that, because that's been what I've been doing as well for several years, you'll begin to recognize those around you will start to harmonize with that energy as well. And because as within, so without, right? So as we begin to shift that our internal, will begin to recognize our external reality will start to change too. And because we are energetic beings, our children are the ones that we, the loved ones that we live with, our pets, they all pick up on our energy. And I often, have this when I'm working with people, is they'll have me work with their pets. And I'm like, I always tell them, work on yourself first. Your pet is mirroring back to you, where you're at. And so I think that's really important that we're talking about, how our children play a role in this as well, because if you've got high stress children, you've got to take a look back at yourself and say, well, what energy am I bringing in to this household, or my spouse? What energy are we bringing in that could be, sort of creating this environment of stress and anxiety that we're living in?
Yeah. Right. And if we keep bringing it back to the basics, the basics of our own biology, everything is, if we filter everything in terms of what our brain is after, then you can give yourself some sympathy and empathy for where you are. And you can separate yourself also from needing your kids to change what they're going through, because their brains are constantly, like a computer system, constantly looking for the triggers in their stress response. And so, as me as a parent, if their brain knows that I'm going to react to them, their brain is using me as a source of a reaction. If I keep reacting, I'm part of the problem.
Yeah.
So
They
I
keep
need to be the one
engaging in it.
that
Mhm.
changes the frequency of my own energy so that I'm not a source of reactivity for their brain to lock into. So, I mean, and you see it, like if you understand that this is what's happening, then you can see, like with my daughter, I used to be triggered all the time by my daughter. She's now 11. I've gotten to a point where I understand it so much deeper, where I'm more disciplined and committed to being in my present nervous system.
Mhm.
But as I've really upped my practice and really held space to not be a source of trigger for her, she turned to her brother. So now all of a sudden her brain knows, oh, I'm not going to get dad to react. Okay, let's go to my brother. And all of a sudden now that's just ramped up completely, because she knows, or her brain knows, that her brother is going to react constantly. And that's all, when kids are fighting, that's a large part of what's happening, is it's their own brains fighting to the reactivity, because the brain's like, yes, I'm getting so much adrenaline from this. But
And
if there's
why do you think we
nobody,
want that adrenaline so much? You know, do you think we're programmed to feel that? You know, why do we want that so
well,
bad?
we don't, but the brain does.
The
You
brain
know,
does.
as a survival organ, it's such a beautiful organ, but it's very primitive in its approach to just wanting to continue to get the two dominant sources of energy for the brain is adrenaline, which is, again, it's our fight or flight hormone, and dopamine, which is known as the voltage of the brain, the neurotransmitter that's known for, the motivational side of things, but it's now linked to pretty much every escape habit we have as human beings. And the two dominant ones for our kids is processed food and sugar and social media.
Absolutely. And it's constant stimulation all the
Constant,
time. Yeah, and
constant.
it's tough to shut that off. I mean, like I said, that was the environment I was in. It was just the moment I opened my eyes in the morning, my phone was going off and I had to respond. It was
Yeah.
just constant, you know. And so one thing that helped me regulate my nervous system was spending more time in nature. And that's why I like to post, most of the photos. If for those of you watching my YouTube channel, you see a lot of really pretty scenery behind me. I spend a lot of time in nature. I like to hike. I like to get out. I like to
Yeah, that's
really
great.
explore. And so, Adam, how do we bring the nature back into human nature? Because that's
Hmm.
exactly uh, where we need to be with that, with the Schumann resonance, with, the way that our brain waves correlate with the Earth's frequency. There's so much benefits as human beings to be outside. How do we bring that back
Hmm.
into our lives?
Yeah, well, this is a great question. And I love this because in the process, in terms of when I'm guiding a client through this, it's not something we have to really focus on in terms of how do I do this more? How do I get nature more? It becomes one of the dominant manifestations. It actually just starts to show up because of the frequency of nature. It automatically puts you in that resonance of being grounded, of being present. And so you start to manifest things into your life that allow you to be in that energy more and more. So, an example, one of my clients, Michelle, we were on a call, and she did my program years ago. And we were just doing a check-in call. And she was telling me all these beautiful things that have been showing up in her life. And she highlighted that most of them are coming in the form of nature. Like all of a sudden, she became a scout leader for her son's scout program. And I loved it because you can tell from her energy that she's so excited that nature is showing up the way it is, but she's also excited how it's also bringing in the other elements that are really important in her life, like being there as a present parent. So it's not so much that we need to look to how do we bring nature in. It's more of the more we align our heart in this coherent way where we're very present to our own energy, you're going to find nature in the most beautiful ways that fits your busy life. You just have to make sure that when it shows up, you honor it, you take action on it. You're going to be so motivated for it, but you don't just sit on the couch and twiddle your thumbs. When it shows up, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going outside for that. And you do it.
And you appreciate it in the moment. Even when I was working in that high stress job, I was living in Florida at the time, and I had to travel all over the place. I would pack my lunch, and I'd find a beautiful lake, and I would park there, and I would get out, and I would sit at a picnic table, even if I had a 30-minute break, and I would take my shoes off and put my feet on the ground. And, just that 30 minutes that I had, it was just heaven for me, because I was, in artificial lighting and in these hospital settings. And, so it really is, oftentimes prioritizing it as well, because I could have driven past that and had my lunch in the hospital. I could have chose, like you talked about, the power of choice. I could have chose to do that, but I chose to spend that 30 minutes out in nature. And we're human batteries, right? We get charged up. We get charged up by being outside. And for me, it was just, I looked forward to that every day when I.
Well, it makes sense, because you probably got to a point where you understood the feeling experience of it. And that's the big disconnect right now, is we've lost touch with our ability to actually feel. We're so driven to just be distracted and keep charging for whatever the brain's telling you to charge for. And we know that's going to have a symptom of some kind, because your nervous system's out of whack. And so you're going to be inflamed. So you're going to crave all sorts of things. You're going to have an imbalance of your own hormones. You're going to have a decrease in your mitochondrial energy. There's so many you're going to have poor sleep. All sorts of things are coming just from your lack of being able to reset your own response to life. But when you shift that relationship, and you bring presence in, and you actually regulate consistently, you're going to feel the peacefulness of that, the calmness, the presence of that. And if you have the tools around you, like nature, that continues to allow you to learn what that feels like, it's so significant that it's important that you recognize it, because it's not about getting on the next diet to lose the weight or to get the next sleep supplements so that you have a better quality sleep. That's just band-aids to what really is happening, which is a dysfunction of your own nervous system.
Absolutely.
When you give it the space it wants, you're going to feel the power of it. And nature is just such an amazing way to get access to that result immediately. And that's the way it should be.
It should be. And, so Adam, is there a tool or a technique that you can share for those out there who are in where we were, that sympathetic nervous system, that fight, flight, or freeze, that constant stimulation of the nervous system, that chaos? Is there anything that you can share for someone that's just starting out, that is finally becoming aware that I need to change, I need to shift, I need to move more into the parasympathetic?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I'm talking to the parents out there specifically, because the mission really is, we want parents who know how to regulate so they can provide environments of co-regulation for their kids. Our kids need this more now than ever. So all you dads and moms out there, step 2 of my process is being able to learn how to calm your own mind. In the moments that you're feeling really triggered, calm your own mind. And in that, you can reset your own stress response. You can regulate your nervous system in 33 seconds. Now, I learned this from climbing, where I would be up in the middle of a really high cliff, hundreds of feet of exposure down below, real fight or flight and panic mode. And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot panic here. I have to reset this. Otherwise I could die. I kept doing this rotation of breath, and I didn't know what it was at the time. And as I did the research, I realized, wow, there's something about playing with your own heartbeat that doesn't require 20 minutes or 20 hours of sitting in which meditation was always a difficult thing for me. I needed something in the moments of my life that helped me reset. So this is a 33-second breath practice. It's called Heart Flow. And what it is, and if anybody wants this as well, we can link it to the show notes, because I have a training on this and it's free. But the idea is that in the moments of life, you're taking 3 times out of your day where you're spending 33 seconds to focus on resetting your own nervous system through heart flow breath practice. It's a rotation of 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out, 4 seconds in, 7 out, 4 in, 7 out. Now, there's hundreds of different breath practices out there. This one is very specific to being able to reset your nervous system back into the parasympathetic in the moment of something that is triggering you. And if you utilize this, like I mentioned, 3 times or more every day, the one result that I want you to feel is the connection to resetting yourself back into a feeling of feeling peaceful, feeling calm, feeling present. That's the only thing we should be after at this moment, is a deeper connection to what that feels like, because from there, then you get to do so much more. But that's step one.
So when you're taking those breaths, is it in through the nose, out through the mouth? Does it matter?
So in through the nose is ideal, out through the mouth or nose, depending on where you are in terms of the practice itself. Some folks find it quite difficult to keep going through the nose, so going through the mouth. But the key with that is trying to do your best to keep the rhythm very clean. As long as you keep the 4 in, 7 out nice and rhythmic, so you're not holding it at any moment or dropping it up and down. You're just doing 4 in through the nose, 7 out through the nose or mouth. Keep it nice and rhythmic. And what that rhythm will do is it will send a very clean signal up the vagus nerve to teach your brain to let go of the use of that trigger. Wow. That's what we're trying to do. Just keep telling your brain, hey, brain, I love you. You're safe. You don't need to use my kids as a trigger anymore. Or, hey, brain, it's okay. I know I have a few extra pounds around my waist. You don't have to use that to try and trigger me into self-doubting thoughts. I'm just going to reset myself. Boom. And right away, you're decreasing inflammation. You're helping the weight drop on its own naturally. You're giving yourself back energy, and you're a completely different person in that moment.
Yeah. And I noticed that because I work a lot with releasing unprocessed emotions with people. And oftentimes we pack on the pounds as a protection mechanism, you know, and at least that was my experience. And so, you know, once we begin to regulate the nervous system, the body is extremely intelligent, right? And so the moment we begin to get everything in order, it's just like a car, getting regular oil changes, getting regular tune-ups, you know, we've got to do that with our body. But oftentimes we're so out of alignment, you know, that it can be difficult for us to get to a point. But once we regulate the nervous system, it's like everything else just starts to naturally and organically fall right back into place.
Well, and it's the foundation for us to live from. It's, you know, again, the basic analogy is you're building a house. Well, yeah, if you keep focusing on trying to fix everything and another diet, another fitness program, okay, but that's just putting Band-Aids on the broken house, where you want a strong foundation. Well, the foundation is your nervous system. If you learn how to nourish it, then you can look at, and this is step 6 of my roadmap, then you can look at your diet, then you can look at your fitness, then you can look at your relationships around you, and you can do some beautiful things because you have more management of your stress response to those. If you do those first, like I've been on so many diets in the past, they'll leave you feeling, you know, some level of self-shame and guilt because your brain is designed to create the stress around those. Yeah. So we have to know what the brain is up to before we dive into those.
I like how you said to have a conversation with the brain, because I do that all the time. It's like, okay, I can sense I can feel tension in my body, and I can sense that my thoughts are creating that tension. And so just having that conversation, like I've even visualized myself kind of sitting there across from my anxiety or across from my depression, or, you know, like you would with a spouse or with a friend, and having a dialogue, you know, like, what is it that is making you, you know, stressed out? What is causing this? When did this start? How far back, you know, did this go? And just having a beautiful kind of communicative dialogue with whatever it is that is kind of coming to the surface, like a pressure cooker, right? It's ready to be released.
And most of it is coming from our childhood stressful moments, whether we label them traumatic or not. The biology of those experiences is the same. It becomes very much a brain that's looking to protect itself, but yet denying us the ability to play with our own emotions. And then we get locked into these triggered responses, and the brain keeps learning of the triggers. And then you enter adulthood and you have all the triggers of your finances and your career and your relationships and your health. it's a hard place to navigate life from.
It really is. I had a friend who had a neat piece of technology. I think it came from the Heart Math Institute, but you'd connect it, to, I think it's your finger. I can't remember, but it was a heart mind coherence
Yeah.
mechanism, and it had this, it had the waves on it, and you could kind of tell. I would start to think a thought that would create anxiety in my mind, and it would start buzzing up, and then I'd get back
Oh,
into my heart space, and it would start to even out. It was really a neat little piece of technology to
I
kind of at
have
least
I
see.
have
Yeah.
one here. It's
Do you?
I have an M Wave. It's an M Wave 2. It clips on your ear,
They're
and
your
it has
ear.
this
That's it.
yeah, and it has a light that shows you, and it's great. And I use it with my kids so they learn how to regulate, create coherence. Then it's like, okay, we learn how to regulate the breath because we know we're so shallow in our breathing and it's so disruptive. And so let's just get that back online. But then it's also, how can I use that breath in my day-to-day, like when I go in the kitchen, and I, like, my book, The Power of Food, came from my own ability to work with my breath in a way where I could shift my sugar cravings and sugar addiction to where it transformed my relationship to food to where I was just so regulated in being able to be creative in the kitchen in a way where presence was leading that whole experience. It was just, you start to learn that you can extend these acts of love. You can extend the time inside of that kind of energy. But it does come from recognizing that you have the ability to shift how your heartbeat functions and clean it up so that your brain doesn't lock you into these ways of life that, don't feel as good as you want to feel.
Absolutely. And that's so powerful. And I think just having the visual of that, being able to see that how my thought does affect how my nervous system starts to react. And so, and we have the power to raise the frequency of our food. And I've shared this on my show many times. I think we get so caught up in, I've got to have this, or I've got to get this, and I've got to do that. We can raise the vibration of our food. I do it all the time, and using our hearts and, activating that. And so it's too, when we start to regulate our nervous system, it's almost like I see, prior to us regulating it, we've got a full glass of water. We can't pour any more water into that glass of water. You've got to, dump it out and restart over. So it's like almost like these bursts of inspiration come through us when we start to regulate, because we're allowing, we're letting go of the energy that was, no longer serving us. And now we're creating space for new things to come in. And so I notice that oftentimes when people start to regulate, then they'll write a book, or they'll, have this amazing experience, or say, this is the path I need to go, because there's more clarity in that. And that's why I wanted to name the show Finding Calm and Clarity, because they kind of go hand in hand. It's like, once you calm yourself, then that clarity will come through.
Well, your brain function is just, you just don't realize what limited capacity you've been working at until you do clean it up. Next thing you know, your executive function's working. You're like, oh my God, I have so much focus. I have so much motivation. And it almost becomes, it's like, again, it's just, we don't know what we don't know. And so we just need to know that there's an easy way to tune into this, and it doesn't require arduous fitness programs and diets and, whatever the latest fad thing is. It's just keep focused on creating space to recognize that presence, this moment, not your past, not what the future might hold for you. How do you create a relationship with this moment and learn what it feels like? And know that there's biological practices that will help you to do that. And then from there, you can just play so much more with your life.
You really can. And it's fun. And then, just kind of consciously being aware that society's programmed to activate our nervous system. So it's almost like you're going against the grain when you start to regulate it. But Adam, can you share with us a little bit about some of the services that you provide?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I do have a program. It's called Unleash Your Energy. It's my my signature program for parents who really want to get off of the trigger train and constantly being agitated by themselves, their partner, their kids, and want to live with more peace, more joy, more presence, more calm, more energy. And I take them through a 3-month process of just exactly what we're talking about. In terms of that process, like I mentioned, I have a roadmap. It's a 6-step roadmap. If anybody who's listening to this feels interested in learning what those 6 steps are, you can download it off my website. It's free, and it will guide you through the steps that I take all my clients.
That's great. And can you just share what your website is, Adam?
Yeah, it's clearimpact.io, clearimpact.io.
Great. And I'm going to leave all of those links. I've got the link for your Unleash Your Energy program and for your website as well, for anybody out there who is interested in, checking that out. And thank you, Adam, for sharing this wisdom and this knowledge with all of us today, and for sharing it with parents, because what this is going to do is it's going to ripple out to generations to come. Because if we're teaching parents now how to regulate their nervous systems, it's going to teach their children, and then their children and their children. And it's just going to shift the frequency, as we look forward into our kind of generational paths that we see. So thank you for, coming on the show. I could feel the calming presence of you. I could feel it the moment we connected. And I know that those watching and those listening are going to tune into that as well. So I appreciate the energy that you're bringing out into the world. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate your time.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.